Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It has to be fought for and defended by each generation.
A recent poll found that 69% of Americans believe America is heading in the wrong direction when it comes to freely expressing your beliefs. Thanks to our First Amendment, the right to freely express your thoughts and opinions is undoubtedly one of the qualities that makes America, America. It's the reason why Martin Luther King Jr. was able to use his I Have a Dream speech to motivate millions of Americans during the Civil Rights Movement. It's why Vietnam protesters could legally burn the U.S. flag, and why, just a few years ago, millions of Americans could take to the streets in the George Floyd protests without fear of repercussion. So, if these rights are so vital to what makes America the country it is, why do so many of us fear we're losing them? And which candidate will continue to protect the First Amendment moving forward? This is Election Facts for the Undecided Voter. Part 2, Free Speech. First off, why should you care? Well, as explained earlier, freedom of thought, speech, and expression are core tenets to what makes America so special. And secondly, if the health of our free speech rights begins to worsen, the slippery slope in which we could lose those rights altogether is much too steep. Here's an example. According to Human Rights Watch, over the last 12 years, the Russian government has intensified its crackdown on extremist language, all in an effort, they say, to stifle terrorism. That sounds like a good goal, right? But Russia used those laws to eliminate press critical of President Putin, and some translations of the Quran were outlawed too. When a rock band staged an anti-Putin performance in 2012 inside a cathedral, they were arrested for hooliganism and religious hatred, and 2 of the members were sent to jail for 21 months. So now let's get to the basics. What rights do you have? There are some forms of expression not protected by the Constitution, like obscenity, false advertising.
Oh, and remember, Coke is low in calories, too.
Threatening language with the true intention of causing harm, and anything false that damages the reputation of someone.
Nick Sandman, according to his attorneys, defamed by several national news outlets.
And if you are partaking in freedom of expression in the form of a protest, for example, and you begin to act violently or break the law in any other way, that also is not protected. Almost anything else, and you should be good to go. Yes, even if what you're saying is 100% false or is hurtful or hateful to another group of people. Speaking of false, let's dive into misinformation. It's a term you've likely heard over and over again for the last several years.
Dangerous misinformation.
Election disinformation.
Continued misinformation.
It's disinformation.
Mis or disinformation really just means false information that's being spread. We saw it being used a lot during the COVID pandemic, when big tech companies like Facebook announced they'd be removing misinformation about the virus from their platform. But here's the thing. A lot of the information being classified as misinformation or as baseless conspiracy theories eventually turned out to be true.
Conspiracy that coronavirus was man-made in a lab in Wuhan, China.
The head of the FBI in the United States has said the coronavirus pandemic is most likely to have emerged from a Chinese laboratory.
You might think the intent to stop false information is a good thing. But remember Putin and how he used the cover of fighting extremist language to prosecute Russians who were speaking out against him. Do you trust our politicians, left or right, not to do the same? If you do 100% trust them, well, you can stop this video here. If not, then which candidate is most likely to be an advocate for your free speech rights moving forward, even if that free speech goes against what their administration believes? They've both called out falsities being spread online or by the media.
We are fighting the fake news. It's fake, phony, fake.
If you act as a megaphone for misinformation, we are going to hold you accountable.
Many on the left believe that if Trump wins, free speech is over. During his time in office, Trump used his free speech rights to call out a lot of journalists for reporting what he claimed were lies about him and his administration. The left uses examples like this.
I called the fake news the enemy of the people, and they are.
To prove their point, saying the words he's using are threats to democracy. But did he act on those words? Possibly once. In 2018, the White House asked CNN reporter Caitlin Collins not to attend an event with the rest of the White House press pool that day. CNN and most of the media reported it as a ban against Collins, but the White House says they never used the word ban. They asked her not to attend thanks to inappropriate decorum they believed she illustrated earlier in the day. Trump has also advocated for a proposal that would require 1 year of jail time for someone who burns the American flag, something most free speech absolutists would disagree with. And he suggested that media organizations that lie should have their licenses challenged. To be clear, the President of the United States does not have the right to pull TV licenses, and even furthermore, news networks don't even have licenses to begin with. During the COVID pandemic, Trump sided with religious institutions fighting against state regulations trying to close them down. He also passed an executive order requiring that any college campus receiving federal funding for things like research must also support the, quote, free inquiry of ideas among its students. So what about Kamala? She and her supporters have spoken repeatedly about censoring misinformation on social media platforms.
They are directly speaking to millions and millions of people without any level of oversight or regulation. And that has to stop.
These big platforms need to be subject to some level of public oversight and regulation.
Americans who are engaged in this kind of propaganda, and whether they should be civilly or even in some cases criminally charged is something that would be a better deterrence.
Her running mate, Tim Walz, said this in 2022.
I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy.
He doubled down when questioned about that clip by his opponent, Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance.
The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
His supporters said his clip was taken out of context, but even if so, false or hateful language is protected by the Constitution. When questioned about a report that accused the Biden-Harris administration of working with big tech to censor posts they deemed inaccurate, the administration neither confirmed or denied.
Combating disinformation, that is something that we are committed to.
So you are flagging misinformation as
I don't have anything more to add. This is a Department of Homeland Security that I would refer you to.
And again, they have advocated for doing more of that.
We will hold social media platforms accountable for the hate infiltrating their platforms because they have a responsibility.
In April 2022, the Biden administration announced the Disinformation Governance Board, which the White House said would combat misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation that threatened U.S. security. After public outcry and lots of comparisons to the book 1984, the plans were shut down. So we know what each candidate has said in the past, but what are the candidates' plans moving forward if they win the White House? Chubb's campaign website features a 5-part plan to combat censorship, especially censorship online among big tech platforms. He says he will sign an executive order that bans any federal department or agency from working alongside big tech to monitor or impede free speech. And he said he would fire any federal bureaucrat who engaged in domestic censorship under the Harris regime. Kamala's website does have a section on freedoms, including the freedom to vote, the freedom from discrimination, reproductive freedoms, and the, quote, freedom to love who you love openly and with pride. Her website does not mention freedom of speech or the First Amendment. Those are the facts. Now it's time for you to decide.